Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Garhdo Goes Geek. On today's episode, I want to review a series that I'd hoped to record an episode for sooner than this, but due to circumstances beyond my control and at the whims of corporate mascots, I was unable to access the series until I decided to go the more privateer way, shall we say. And that show is Willow, which was released last year in 2022 and is now currently unavailable anywhere. It hasn't had a physical home release and it's not available on any streaming service less than a year after it was released, as part of a lot of corporate cost-cutting measures that seem to be the norm with the streaming market these days. But this is a series that's a high fantasy series that is also a sequel to a very beloved 80s film, which is also celebrating its anniversary this year. So, I thought, what better time to cover it? So here's my review and discussion of Willow. So, I'll do a quick note on spoilers before I get too deep in this. As the series is unavailable by legal means, I would encourage people to watch it if you can get a hold of it. If you know your way around torrent sites or, sort of any of the sort of more cutthroat online methods to get this sort of content, go for it. Because this is a show that you have no legal means of obtaining. So, in my view, watch it, discuss it, talk about it. That puts pressure on Disney, who own it, to make it legally available, because it's been proven that piracy goes down when there is a legal way to acquire something. A convenient legal way to acquire something. This was on Disney Plus and it was removed. The original film is still on Disney Plus. So, but the series isn't. Now, because I'm recommending this show as one that I think you should go and watch, I don't want to spoil too much of the show itself, because I think it's worth watching. I think there's a lot here to like, and a lot that's very different from the film, but in a very good way. Now, I am going to discuss the film as well. Now, the film is 35 years old this year. It came out in 1988, right? I am more than happy to discuss spoilers of the film, and I probably will spoil the film to get to the point where I can talk about the setup for this show going forward. But also, this show was clearly meant to have a sequel, clearly meant to have a second season and possibly a third season by the look of something that was in the end series. Basically, the show presents itself as like a book of Willow, and then in the final shot of the show, someone takes the book that's been showing our chapter titles for the episode titles for each episode and places it back on a shelf, and then we see that this book is volume 1 and there's a volume 2 and a volume 3 next to it. So it's clear that there was a story arc here, and apparently season 2 has been written, but then obviously we had the writer's strikes and other stuff. It's not happening, unfortunately. Now, that said, like I said, I don't want to get too involved in spoilers, but I am going to discuss some overall elements of the show that kind of set the tone for the early episodes. I don't really want to go too spoiler heavy for anything past the midpoint. It's an 8-episode season, so I'm not really going to spoil anything past episode 4. So, your mileage may vary on that. If that is going to bother you, stop listening now, go download it, go watch, find a way of watching this show, and then come back, because I think it's a good show. I just want to also add another note, which is that I don't really have the childhood nostalgia for Willow that I know a lot of people of my generation do. I wasn't really invested in fantasy when I was younger. That wasn't to say that I didn't like fantasy. I just there was a lot of like 80s fantasy and sci-fi movies, and I've always tended to gravitate more towards science fiction than um fantasy. Although even then I didn't really watch Star Wars when I was younger. I watched the Star Trek movies, the original 6 Star Trek movies. I watched them, loved those. Um but I didn't really watch Star Wars. But so my biggest fantasy film when I was younger was Labyrinth. I loved Labyrinth. I had a VHS tape of that I watched to death. Absolutely loved it. So there's two other big ones from the 80s that passed me by. Willow is one, the other is Dark Crystal, which I'll probably talk about at some point. And so I didn't really watch either of those until I was an adult. Now, in the case of Willow, Willow is from Lucasfilm. It was released in 1988, directed by Ron Howard. The story came from George Lucas and was written and drafted by Bob Dolman. Basically, it seems to have basically been a vehicle for the young Warwick Davis to star in an action adventure movie, and I'm totally fine with that. I like Warwick Davis. I think he's a very he comes across as an absolutely lovely man. He seems like someone who just seems brilliant to be around and is very, very positive about the projects that he works on. However, I don't think he's a great actor. Having watched both the film now and this series, I don't think he's the best actor. Some of his line delivery is a bit stilted in points. But it's Warwick Davis. I like him in everything I've seen him in. He's just got a charm to him as a person, which is very, very endearing. Um, and he's not the main character. Well, he is the main character. He's the title character. He is Willow Ufgood, and he is a Nelwyn. All of the Nelwyns are played by actual dwarven actors, which I think is great. Um, you know, dwarf actors, not dwarven. They're not fantasy people. Dwarf actors playing the race of Nelwyn, and there's a few that I've, especially in the film, that I'm like, I've seen them in other things around that time, so that's pretty cool as well. But the film is basically this high fantasy film. Also stars Val Kilmer as Mad Martigan, Joanne Whalley as Saoirse, and Jean Marsh as the evil queen Bavmorda. The film itself is very much an adventure story. Like, I watched this film and I quite liked it, but I was watching it as an adult and I was really going, this feels like a series. It doesn't feel like a film. It feels like a series of vignettes, because there's a lot of scenes that are just kind of strung together in a real kind of loose way. The main plot is that they find this baby, Elora Danan, who is prophesized to be able to bring about Bavmorda's downfall. Bavmorda is this villainous queen of Knockmar. She's a black sorceress. And so she's trying to hunt down this girl who's an infant. It's a baby. The baby gets found by the Nelwyn, and Willow, who is a farmer who really wants to be a sorcerer, gets told to take her and keep her safe. And he ends up encountering other sorcerers and sort of godlike beings who kind of, sort of tell him, how important his quest is. Like, there's Shalindria, who's a fairy queen. There's Raziel, who's this elderly sorceress who's also like turned into a possum. Um, yeah, it's silly, but it's very funny. But yeah, basically he falls in with this mercenary swordsman called Mad Martigan, and Mad Martigan kind of sort of gets won over by Willow and helps him on his quest to protect this baby. And they're being pursued by Bavmorda's forces, including her main warrior, who is Kale, who is this high commander of her army, who wears like a skull mask, and Sorsha, who is her warrior daughter. Now, Sorsha and Mad Martigan end up falling in love, which is kind of a trope from films of this time. And it means that Sorsha eventually turns on Bavmorda to sort of help uh, Willow and Mad Martigan defeat her, which they do. You know, there's this massive climactic battle at Nockmaar, which is, Bavmorda's castle and spell. And, this huge army um, turns up. The kingdom of Galadorn, who's Mad Martigan's, makes friends with their commander, who's Eric. So he turns up to kind of help, and they all sort of lay siege to the castle. And it's only through like a little sleight of hand magic that Willow does right at the end that makes Bavmorda think that he's made Laura disappear. So then she moves to attack him, but in doing so, she actually completes the ritual that she was trying to do to banish Laura, and actually kind of banishes herself. So yeah, it's a good little film, but like I said, there's a lot goes on in it, and it feels very much of a sort of style of something like The Hobbit, where it's like if you read The Hobbit, the actual novel of it, stay away from the horrible films. But if you read the actual novel of The Hobbit, each chapter seems to be its own part of the adventure, its own separate adventure within the grander narrative. And that's kind of how Willow feels. Because, there's, meeting Shalindria and getting the magic wand and then getting sent to find Raziel, and then teaming up with the brownies, Frangine and Rule, and then finding Mad Martigan, who's ended up hiding again. And there's so much going on, and locations are changing a lot. There's a bit with a love potion. There's a bit with a giant dragon. It's two-headed like dragon monster that's created from a troll. But yeah, it's quite good, but there is a lot going on. And it's like watching it as an adult, I'm like, this there's so much here. That almost like the film itself is sort of struggling under the weight of it. Like it's a 2-hour film, so things have room to develop and room to move, but there's so many good ideas here, so many rich ideas. Even a lot of the sort of the attitude between the two main races, like the Nelwyn and the Daikini, where Daikini are all the tall people, you know, and it's like the divide between them, and there's even like a lot of some of the Daikinis have these quite discriminatory nicknames for the Nelwyn. They call them Peck, and it's like there's a lot going on. A lot of good stuff going on, and it's perfectly satisfying on its own as a film, but I don't know, it feels very bound by a lot of tropes of the time, very very 80s in a lot of ways, and it's perfectly serviceable as a film. It's lovely to watch, beautiful to look at. Val Kilmer as Mad Martigan is a lot of fun. So yeah, there's just a lot of good stuff going on. The series, however, starts 20 years later. And, the the kingdom at the end of the series that was founded of Tir Asleen, which is now ruled by Queen Sorsha. They are waiting the return of Elora Danan, because Elora Danan is in hiding. And, we get introduced to the characters. Bavmorda was defeated years ago. Sorsha's become the new queen. She married Madmartigan, had his children, the twins, which are Prince Erk and Prince Kit. Erk has a romantic friendship with a commoner called Dove, while Kit is in love with her knight protector called Jade. And Jade also is, training to be a knight, and her commander Ballantyne wants to sort of wants to sponsor her to become like this elite group of knights. I've forgotten what their names are. But yeah, they don't take women, but she's been accepted. She's going to be the first one that's been accepted. Sorsha is intending to marry Kit to Prince Garhdo, who is the Prince of Galadorn. Sort of like a marriage alliance to sort of unify Tir Asleen and Galadorn. But also, there's other stuff. Madmartigan disappeared some time ago, and Sorsha keeps having visions of a new threat called the Gales. While the people of Galadorn are at Tir Asleen, the Gales attack. Now, there is a barrier around the lands of Tir Asleen and Galadorn, which should like a magical barrier, which should prevent dark magic from coming in. But like this barrier was formed by Raziel, Willow, and Shalindra. The Gales shouldn't have got in, but they did, and in doing so, they are able to infect Commander Ballantyne and kidnap Eric. So now, Kit, Jade, Graydon, one of the knights called Jorgen Case, and an incarcerated Thraxus Borman, who is a former compatriot of Madmartigan's, are sent out on a quest to rescue Eric. So they leave, and Dove follows them because, Dove and Eric are in love, and she's a commoner, but Eric loves her, seems to genuinely love her, so she wants to leave to try and find him. They cross out past the barrier, and they get attacked by several bone reavers who all wear the skull masks, so they all look like Kale. They kill the knight who's come with them, and they only escape because of Borman. He kind of leads them away. Sorsha told them when they left that they would need to find a sorcerer, so she directed them to Willow. They arrive at Willow's village, which seems to have been destroyed, and Willow reveals that Dove is actually Elora Danan, and that she was hidden as a commoner for her own protection. Not only that, Erk is being imprisoned by the Withered Crone, who is basically the being responsible for Bavmorda's fall. And so that's all just the first episode, by the way. There's nothing I've said there that isn't in episode 1. So yeah, that's basically the plot. They're going to go, to this, I think it's called the Immemorial City beyond the Shattered Sea, to go and find this Withered Crone and defeat her. So that they can rescue Prince Eric. And, so Elora Danan can kind of fulfill her part in the prophecy. There's a lot more going on than that that gets explored over the next few episodes. But that's basically the plot of the show. So, let's discuss a bit more about the show. Right, firstly, I just want to make a bit of a note about sort of the cast and crew of this series, because it does, I think, inform one of the some of the major stylistic differences between the film and the show. So there's 7 main cast members in the show. There's obviously Warwick Davis returning as Willow Ufgood. There's the rest of the cast are all quite young. So you have Ellie Bamber, who had a role in the BBC version of Les Miserables as Elora Danan. You have Ruby Cruz. Sorry, I don't know why I stumbled over that so much. Ruby Cruz is Princess Kit Tanthalos. Erin Kellyman is Jade. I recognised her in this from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where she played the Flag Smasher character. I've forgotten her name now, the Flag Smasher leader. Tony Revolori, also from the MCU, although he's been in plenty of other things. He's done a lot of stuff with Wes Anderson, but he's the actor behind Flash Thompson in the Spider-Man films, the MCU Spider-Man trilogy. He plays Prince Graydon. Dempsey Burke, who has no Wikipedia entry, he plays Prince Eric. He's kind of the most reduced of the main cast members because obviously he's not on the adventure with the rest of them. He's kind of the damsel that needs rescuing. So he only really gets like the first and maybe the last episode to really kind of shine, but I get the feeling he was clearly designed for something further as the show went on. And then finally, Amar Chadha Patel as Thraxus Borman. Borman is great. He's the oldest character of the lot. Obviously, he's the big warrior archetype. He's the Mad Martigan archetype. He is a lot of fun. I don't know what else he's done at all. I don't know if he's done a lot of films in East Asian cinema, perhaps, but apparently he's in Wheel of Time as well, looking him up now. But yeah, he's great in this. Like, a lot of fun. Like, he has some of the funniest lines. He just comes across as a badass in combat. He gets some really good, like, action sequences. Seems to have a bit of an actual character to him as well. Excuse me. So yeah, and he seems to have this genuine loyalty to Mad Martigan, which gets commented on several times. That's why Saoirse kind of appoints him to the quest, is because she knows that he will see it done because of his own loyalty, to sort of square a debt with his friend. And yeah, it's through him we kind of learn what happened to Mad Martigan, because obviously, Val Kilmer has, the man has gotten ill over the recent years. So he's not really in this. He can't really return as Mad Martigan. He's had throat cancer. It's impacted quite a lot of his quality of life. And, as a result, Mad Martigan isn't in the show, but his absence is also kind of a central thing. There's a reason he's not here. And we kind of find out through Borman what happened, because Borman and Mad Martigan were given a quest to find the Chimerian cuirass, which is like a piece of magical armor. And Chimeria is the ancient land that Elora Danan has the blood of. Like, she has the blood. She's the last blood of Chimeria. So yeah, there's a lot of plot there around who Borman is, and obviously that creates a lot of tension between him and Kit, because Kit wants to know kind of what happened to her father. I get the feeling that Mad Martigan has been absent for a long time, and that's affected Kit and Eric as they've grown up. I will say as well, obviously, there's a lot going on here. There's these characters are really well developed. Like, there's a lot of good stuff between them. Like, Graydon is betrothed to Kit, but there's no real love there on either part of them. Graydon is very kind of. Yeah, Graydon is. He's young and nervous, and he's got a bit of a dark secret, which we do kind of find out as it goes on. So I don't want to spoil it. But, there's a lot about his character that's kind of hidden, and he's hiding it for a reason. Kit, meanwhile, she's very, very young and impulsive and passionate. Like, for example, she trains with Jade. Like, she's a swordswoman. The two of them fight, and she usually beats Jade. Now, Kit and Jade have a love story. Like, this is like the first, I think the first proper franchise that Disney owns that's actually centered like a queer love story. Because these two are in love, and it's absolutely beautiful. Like, there were points I was like, because it's that real young kind of young love where you're like, just talk to each other, just tell each other how you feel. And there were parts I was really gleeful and like clapping along because I'm like, yes, come on, because it's a good story. The love story is good, and it's a proper part of the series, which also makes the fact that Disney removed it a really terrible look. But yeah, it's a really nice story. Like, they are best friends, but they're also in love, and that's absolutely lovely. I love that. Elora Danan, though, she gets sort of taken under Willow's wing to sort of become a sorceress, because it's only if Elora learns magic that they have a hope of defeating the Crone. And it's only if they can defeat the Crone and the forces beyond her that they really kind of have a chance. The series itself, the series is obviously, George Lucas has no involvement with Lucasfilm since the sale to Disney, so he's not involved in this. But so the person who developed this series is Jonathan Kasdan. Now, Jonathan Kasdan is not someone whose work I'm really familiar with. I know he's had a lot of writing and production and directorial credits, but obviously my main experience with him is his stuff at Lucasfilm, where he was a co-producer and writer on Solo, and obviously he's the writer and executive producer for this. But he's directed a couple of episodes of Roadies. He's written a few episodes of Dawson's Creek, written an episode of Freaks and Geeks. So it's like, I'm sure his work is perfectly serviceable, but this is like the only real thing I've seen him in. I've seen his work. The thing is, it's very different from the film. Like, the way this is presented, obviously there's been huge advancements in technology, budget, and so much other stuff since the original film was made. Like, the budget of the original film was like 35 million in 1980s, the late 80s. This is 105.9 million for the whole series. And there's a lot of location shooting. They've done a lot of location shooting in Wales, especially, and Wales has some gorgeous countryside. So a lot of their locations that they're using are just beautiful. Um, but a lot of those locations, stuff isn't being done with matte paintings. It's being done with CGI and plate shots and things like that, and it works. Like, it really does. It works. It looks incredible. And even when things aren't on a location, like there's some bits that are shot in what looks like the volume or some sort of green screen. It might not be the volume, but it looks like a green screen, definitely. And those bits also look really impressive. They look amazing. The sets even look really good. Like the set where a lot of the final scenes of the series take place is incredible. It feels like a real place. There's dimension to it. So yeah, all of that works really well as well. But tonally, there is a lot of differences here. There's obviously, some of it is due to attitudes and tones and things moving on in 35 years. Like, for example, there's some harsher language in this. The word bitch gets used a couple of times. The word shit gets used at least once an episode, or seems to be. So, that has an impact. That there's more, harsher language than there would have been in a film 80 years ago, 30 years ago, that's almost for the same audience. I say almost for the same audience. I think the audience for this does skew a bit higher. Like, this is more aimed for a sort of teen audience, I would say, probably. Now, there's also one other thing that really stood out to me. And I don't dislike it, but it is something that stood out as kind of odd. The original film is scored by James Horner, and it's a really good score. And some of that original score does make its way into this show as well. However, this show also incorporates several needle drops. And for the most part, they're not. There is a score as well. It's a really good score by James Newton Howard, but there are several needle drops. And they're most prominent at the end of each episode. And they're not bad. Like, they're really not bad at all. For the most part, they're songs that I've not really heard before. And if they are ones I've heard, they're kind of, there's a lot of indie music there. But, like, if I have heard them, it's like it's a cover of a song I know. Like, for example, there's a cover of what's it called? There's a cover of Enter Sandman by Metallica here. But it's not Metallica's version. It's by Rina Sawayama. There's a cover of Black Hole Sun by Soundgarden, but it's not Soundgarden's version. It's Noelia's. There's a cover of Hurdy Gurdy Man. But then there's two that I do recognize as, like, big. They're the original version of that song. Like, for example, there's Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys is a needle drop at the end of one episode, and Money for Nothing is the drop at the end of the series. Now, they work. Like, these needle drops tend to work, and like I said, for the most part, they play over the end credits, or maybe start up like just before the end credits, usually over like the final scenes, because the way this series is framed as well is it's kind of framed as a story. Like I said, it's like a book comes down, the pages turn, and we get the title page which says Willow. Then we get the turns to the chapter, and we get a chapter title with a sketch, and then the sketch turns into the action for the opening scene, and then for the ending scene we get the opposite. It turns back into a sketch, and we get sketches over the credits. Usually of the main characters. So there's that aspect as well. And I don't hate it. I think it works, and I think some of the songs are probably going to end up on my playlist because they are pretty good. Like there's episode 5 starts with an action sequence, and they have a score over the action sequence that I think was really well. I think it works really, really well. In fact, there's also one other element which feels very modern to me, and that's the Gales themselves. The Gales are four or five creatures that kind of work for the Crone. So that they all have names in the credits. There's the Scourge, the Doom, the Lich, and the Dag. So the Scourge is this big hulking monstrosity, wears a cage over his head. The Doom is this robed and masked member. The Lich is the one who's able to control other people, so it controls Ballantyne in one of the earlier episodes. And the Dag, who is a shape-shifting member, is able to change into a variety of different shapes, like it turns into a giant bird at one point. And it's like their depiction feels... They feel like a superpower group. Like a close comparison would probably be like the Black Order in Infinity War, where it's like they're barely developed characters. They are a power set of lackeys, lackeys with a mixed power set who can appear in several action sequences and fight our protagonists. Because that's basically the role they serve. Even for the series itself, there is a lot here, especially in the early episodes. It does kind of solidify as it goes on. Like the last 3 episodes very much solidify into a stable quest. But how I said the film feels almost like sort of vignettes and like small chapters? That is really prominent here, because each episode seems to feature a distinct, almost like environment and a distinct adventure. And there's some characters who are great, like who would have been, amazing recurring characters, but just appear in like a few scenes in one episode. Like, for example, Hannah Waddingham has quite a prominent role in episode 3, playing a denim-clad lesbian woodcutter called Hubert, who is there with her wife Anne, and they are like living in the middle of the forest. And Alora kind of runs to them for help because she's running away from the possessed Ballantyne, who's been sent to find them. Even Ballantyne himself sort of fits this role because he gets sent out to find them, turns and falls under the Lich's control while hunting the others, because he's been sent to retrieve Dove by Saoirse once Saoirse finds out that Dove is missing. And that's when he finds out that, he falls under the Lich's control, realizes that Dove is Alora Dannon, and then tries to take her to the Crone. But Ballantyne himself does get defeated. He's only, he's a secondary antagonist for a couple of episodes at best. you know. But Hubert is there, and she talks a lot, and she's amazing, and strikes this real prominent impression with the limited screen time she has, um, and just seems absolutely lovely. But then is just kind of, she's in a few scenes in episode 3, and that's it. You know, and there's a few like that. I mean, Ballantyne's like that himself. He's played by Ralph Ineson, who is he was also in Game of Thrones. I know him from loads of things on British television. He's just one of those actors with this deep and rough northern voice, quite distinctive. Plays a lot of this type of character. The kind of the heavy, that kind of tough and gruff character. And he's in it, and he's brilliant. But again, he's only in a few episodes, then he's gone. He's removed from the story. There's a few others later on, like they end up meeting the Bone Reavers and encountering them again, and then learning more about them. Or they encounter a couple of trolls, and it's like the trolls end up having characters as well. Christian Slater appears as someone. I'm not going to say who, but he appears as someone in episode 6, and he's only in that one episode. But he's in there, and he's really cool. We get to see Rule comes back, the brownie who traveled with Willow and Mount Martigan in the film. Like, he comes back for like a scene, and it's really fun to see him again because I really liked Rule. And he's played by the original actor as well, which is great. There's also Mims, who's Willow's daughter, who's played in this by Warwick Davis's actual daughter, which I thought was really cool. Because obviously in the original she wasn't, because Warwick Davis, I don't think, was old enough to have had kids at that point. But she's in this, and she plays Mims. And again, she's only in one real episode 2, and then gets a couple of cameos later on because she doesn't join them on the quest. And yeah, it's just fun having all these characters. It gives an impression of this big world, because what we have here in both, in this series especially, but especially even more so if you take it into connection with the film as well, is we have a very rich, very developed world, which it is clear that they were trying to build something with, because there's a plot here, there's a story here, but there's also characters beyond the ones that we encounter. And our characters' stories kind of intersect with these other stories briefly. And it works really well. And there's a lot of callbacks to the original film, obviously. Like episode 4 especially is kind of all set in Nockmaar. They're in Bavmorda's castle, so there's a lot of flashbacks there. Laura sees a vision of her birth. They see a vision of Bavmorda's death. There's a lot of things like that. There's a lot, like the opening narration of episode 1 is done by Saoirse and basically shows footage from the original film. But yeah, there's a lot of callbacks to the original film, deliberately so. But what we have here, like, we get a mapped out world. We learn all these locations and sort of where they are. We get an idea of where they are from each other. And it makes it feel very lived in and very real, which I think is integral to any good fantasy series, is that it should feel real and sort of not necessarily grounded, but real. And this does. And, yes, there are a lot of changes. Like, for example, the magic in this. The magic in this is much flashier, much more showy than the magic in the film. And a lot of that only really comes about later on, towards the last few episodes. But it's bright colours and impressive special effects. And it looks incredible. Like, it looks really good. But it's like, that's not the magic we had previously in the film. So, how much your mileage may vary going from the film to this, I don't know. But it's good. It's worth it. And yeah, I think the series is a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with it. I've binged it in the past sort of day and a half, for this episode. Like, rewatched the episodes that I had seen. But like I said, I was watching it earlier before it was removed from Disney Plus, because when they announced they were going to remove it, I'm like, right, I've got to watch this. I want to watch this. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to squeeze it all in by the time I found out about it, I wasn't able to watch it all in time before they got rid of it. And now it seems to be cancelled, which is just this horrible, horrible shame. Jonathan Kasdan has said that season 2 has already been written, and he's expressed its hopes that it would be made. But reporters announced in March that it had been cancelled. Like, it only finished, it came onto Disney Plus between November and January. So November last year and January this year. And they announced it was cancelled in March. And then it was removed in May. And this seems to have been part of the whole content removal. Like, there was a load of stuff that got removed, not just at Disney and Hulu, all over the place. I think it started with Warner Brothers Discovery and all the stuff that they were removing from HBO Max as part of a cost-cutting measure. Getting rid of a lot of animation, things like Infinity Train, cancelling projects left, right, and centre, like Batgirl. And I think a lot of the other streamers just decided to follow suit and just say, right, we'll do the same thing. And some of them have sort of taken things back after pushback. Like, I think Netflix stopped with some of the content that it was planning to remove. Like, there was talk about they were going to remove Voltron Legendary Defender, but I've noticed that is still available on Netflix, so there must have been some pushback to that. But Willow is one of those ones that has been removed, and I don't think it's fair. And Warwick Davis did actually call Disney out for this, because obviously not long after this we started the strikes. And so Warwick Davis did turn around and say, what they've done here with the removing Willow. Willow wasn't there was a film called Crater that got removed like a week after it had debuted on Disney Plus. So Willow isn't even the worst affected. But it's like, this is primarily a cast of young actors who will not get residuals now because this show is not available. This show can't be shown. It can't be, it's not being hosted on a streaming platform, and it's not physically available legally. Like, there's no home video release. So there's a lot of young actors who can, and a lot of people on the production that can no longer use this, can no longer point to this as a source of revenue or, as a way of showing their work. And that's disgusting. And Warwick Davis quite rightly called Disney out for it. And I think more people should call them out for it, because it's despicable. I feel like I'm gonna be ranting a bit for this next bit, because before I get into a bit more of the show and sort of discuss more of it, I want to say, there's a few things that I'm thinking about with streaming at the minute where there seems to be a lot of discussion about streaming, and more importantly, a lot of the shows that seem to be made at the minute. And Willow is a good show to kind of center a couple of these discussions around. So, first of all, there is the discussion that streaming networks are removing content. And like I said, I've already kind of covered that by saying that I do agree that I don't think this should have been removed. Because, and I think I've mentioned it before, Willow was, like, the original film was successful. Like, it was successful, but based on its budget and how much it made, it was successful already. But one of the things that I think made Willow successful and kept it in the discussion was not just its cinema release, it was the fact that this was a film that, when released on home video, when released onto television, grew an audience, grew a cult audience, especially kids, especially parents showing it to their kids. Because I know that's definitely the case with other works of the time. You know, there are plenty of films that I watched as a kid that I didn't watch at the cinema. You know, plenty of these classic films that I never saw at the cinema. I saw them on home video from most of the Disney films. Like, I don't think I saw any of the big Disney Renaissance pictures in the cinema. I don't think I saw, you know, I definitely didn't see things like E.T. and Labyrinth in the cinema because they're way before my time. Star Wars I never saw in the cinema. I'm trying to think what other films I loved as a kid. The Star Trek films, I never saw any of those in the cinema. Any of the first 10 in the cinema. I just didn't. I watched them all on video. You know, and I grew up loving Star Trek. And, you know, other things I loved as a kid, Transformers. You know, the Transformers movie came out when I was, you know, the year I was born. I didn't watch that. you know, I didn't watch that in the cinema. I watched it on video. You know, and that's true with a lot of things. I think I saw Power Rangers, the film for Power Rangers, in the cinema when I was a kid. That was pretty much it. And maybe Jurassic Park, although watching that in the cinema terrified me. But yeah, it's, you didn't watch those things in the cinema. You watched them on video as a kid, and that's where you grew to love it. And that's how films like that grew an audience. That's how things grow a cult audience. They grow a cult audience from home video and, more importantly than that, television. Because films would get licensed onto television and you'd see them because they'd put them in slots. It'd be like the nightly movie, the weekly movie, or films would be shown around the holidays or through the summer, and you'd get these big blockbuster releases on the TV throughout the summer. And so that's where you saw movies like that. The amount of movies I saw for the first time on TV, the amount of movies I still haven't seen all the way through, but probably still like because I caught the last hour of it on film, on television. Right? That's what makes a film like Willow grow an audience. Okay? In the streaming market, you don't get that. There is such a constant release of content in streaming nowadays. Like, and it was bad enough like a few years ago. I remember Netflix was complaining a few years ago how one of their shows or one of their films hadn't been very successful, right? And then I don't think it was Netflix themselves complaining. I think it was the person who worked on the show and said this show hadn't been successful. And part of the reason is because the next Cloverfield had released like a week later, which meant all of the promotion on Netflix's front dashboard went from this release that came out like a week beforehand to Cloverfield Paradox within a week. And I mean, within a week, it was like 4 or 5 days, which meant that this other show was completely overshadowed by this other big project that Netflix just happened to be releasing. Now, Netflix was the one releasing them. It could have staggered its releases. Like, I remember even a few years ago where Ant-Man and the Wasp got delayed over here in the UK because it came out at the same time as a Pixar film, I think. And in America, they'd come out at around the same time. But over here, Pixar had an exclusive right, which meant that the Pixar film came out first and Ant-Man and the Wasp came out 3 months later. It was the only Marvel film that's done it, I think, that came out that long after the US release. Although it's happened with Pixar a few times, like Wreck-It Ralph was another one. That's not Pixar, is it? That's just normal Disney. But Wreck-It Ralph came out a few months after the American release over here as well. And it's like, Disney have the right to do that. They own Pixar, they own Marvel. If they want to put the Marvel film back to let the Pixar release breathe, they can. But, you know, with big cinema films, they don't tend to put things right next to each other. Like, it's rare if Marvel is releasing a big movie, right? Other movies will release their blockbusters for the week after. They're not going to all release on the same week as the Marvel movie because they're just going to get overshadowed. Even then, they might put them back by 2-3 weeks, not even the next week, because it's like, oh, that Marvel movie or that Star Wars movie is still going to be making bank. You know, having something like Oppenheimer release opposite Barbie the same weekend, that sort of stuff is rare nowadays. And I think that only happened because the two of them were marketed for completely different audiences. It was only the Barbenheimer thing that kind of made them both a success. You know? And in cinemas, that works because any film that is going to make money that becomes a tent pole raises all the other films around it because you go to the cinema, you see the trailers, and you're like, oh, okay, that film looks good. I might go check that out. You know, oh, while I'm here, or next week, you know, while I've got nothing on, I might go see that. You know, even with how expensive cinema is getting. With streaming, you don't get that. Things get overshadowed so easily because there's just constant release of content. New episodes, whole seasons dropped at once, new films all the damn time. You know, you can look at the release for any streaming network and there'll be like 20 things in a month. Like, not even separated by like a decent length of time. And sometimes that's just the new stuff or the films that are coming on to premiere, you know, on that streaming service. It's crazy. So much content. And then you add to that when places like Warner Brothers start deleting it. When Warner Brothers Discovery, who, let's be honest, are only doing this to try and make themselves look like they're worth less, so that when David Zaslav eventually sells off Warner Brothers, because that's going to happen, like Discovery is going to sell itself off. There's talks that Paramount Plus might buy them. That Paramount might buy Warner Brothers. But if they don't, then Comcast might, because you know it's going to happen. The same thing happened at Time Warner so that it could sell to Discovery. Discovery is going to do exactly the same thing so it can sell it on. And it just means that all this content is getting scrapped and destroyed, and it's just discarding all this hard work that actors, writers, directors, you know, crew hands, grips, everyone has put all this effort into. So much effort, and it's just getting sidelined. And it winds me the hell up. And it's like, because Warner Brothers Discovery started doing it, other studios just said, "Oh, okay, well, we can do it as well. We'll make it. It's a cost-cutting measure because it costs too much to run the servers." There are fans that run fan servers for online video games that died out years ago. Like online video games where the official servers have been turned off. And there are fans who run online servers so that you can still play those games online. And big games as well. Things like Resident Evil, because that had a series of online games on the PlayStation. Halo, there are fan made servers for those things. If fans can run servers for some of the biggest games on the freaking planet without getting paid for it, then someone like Disney can run the servers to host all of its damn content. The fact that things get vaulted and sort of taken away from paying subscribers and then they charge more on top of that, it is nothing short of disgusting. Like, they're talking about adding ads onto these things. Piracy becomes the sensible option in that case. You are literally paying more for less with digital ownership. And I'm all for digital ownership, but it's like, I bought it, I own it. If I buy a game or a subscription, I have the rights to the things that I have paid for. You know? Oh. So there's that aspect of it. The fact that Willow no longer exists because of that. But then there's something else that Willow does, which I think flies in the way of a lot of other things, which makes its removal even more unacceptable to me. And that is that so much media nowadays is indulging in what I'm calling like a weaponization of nostalgia. Right? And I don't know if that's an official term. I don't know. I've not seen anyone else use it. It's the term I'm using because our nostalgia is being turned into a weapon to get us to buy and consume content. And you can see this in so many films. And don't get me wrong, I like a lot of these things I'm going to talk about. And I'm probably going to get more into this because I'm going to discuss Star Trek Picard, and that is something that really went all in on this. But this sort of weaponization of nostalgia, because where we're bringing back old actors as their characters, where we're bringing back these old franchises and creating new entries out of them, where we're bringing back IP, but sometimes just in name only. And it's not to say that there can't be good projects created from this. Like, I'm not trying to say that at all. A lot of these things that this is happening with, I haven't seen yet. So I can't judge whether they're doing it for better or worse. But like Star Trek Picard season 3, bringing back the entire cast of the Next Generation. The Matrix 4, I've forgotten the name of it now. Whichever one it is, Reawakenings or the fourth one, the fourth Matrix, bringing back um Trinity and doing the Matrix trilogy again. The Ghostbusters Afterlife, although there's things I like about that movie, but or even the Ghostbusters 2016, the Answer the Call one, where it was covering all the main bases of like a lot of the first parts of the movies, the Disney sequel trilogy for Star Wars, or even some of the modern cameos and things like Mandalorian and Ahsoka, where they're bringing back all these old things. And South Park kind of commented on this a few years ago, where they were talking about member berries, and it's that kind of thing. The idea of bringing back all these old things, this old nostalgia, and um, Jurassic World Dominion, that was another one, bringing back all the original cast of the first Jurassic Park movie. Flash trying to bring back Michael Keaton's Batman. Even the MCU with bringing the Spider-Man back, and now Deadpool 3, which is going to bring back Hugh Jackman. It's exactly the same thing. It's trying to get us to go and watch the shiny new thing by deliberately calling back or bringing back things from our childhood. And I get it. I completely understand why they do it. But that's also one of the things that makes Willow better than a lot of other things out there right now, because this show sort of eschews the whole notion of nostalgia. Because this is a sequel to the film, don't get me wrong, but it is very different to the film as well. This doesn't rely on nostalgia like a crutch. It is expanding the world of the original film. We get new characters, we get new mysteries, we get new complexity. We develop the world. Things like the Bone Reavers, there's an obvious link to Kale from the film, but it's explained and it's understood. That Bavmorda, we sort of the crone is revealed to be sort of the being behind her, and then there's another being behind the crone, and that's all kind of explored and developed, which gives Bavmorda more depth as well. Mad Martigan, his whole mission to seek this cuirass, and it all being explained as something that Sorsha sent him to do. And how that explains and develops, and how Mad Martigan has a presence here without actually returning. They haven't bought Val Kilmer out to do Mad Martigan again, to do his sword twirl and his big happy smile. It's like, no, it's Mad Martigan is present within this story, but without directly using him. This isn't nostalgia bait in the same way that so many other things are. This is a sequel to a film without relying on that nostalgia for the film. This is just developing the story and doing something different and creating these new characters and fleshing out these characters. Alora Dannon is the main character here, who was in the original film along with Willow. But in the original film, she was a baby. She's a young woman now. She has her story. This is her story. And the story of her companions. Her mentor in Willow and her companions around her. But it's a new story. Like, in that respect, I'm not even sure it should have been called Willow. Like, the fact it's called Willow is the most nostalgic thing about the entire show. Because, yes, Willow's a character, but Willow isn't the main character of this, like he was in the film. And yet, the fact that something that is so heavily, there is nostalgia at play here. Like, Joanne Whalley returns as Sorsha, Rule reappears, only for a small cameo, but he reappears. But it's like, it's doing something completely different. It's not redoing the film. Like, tonally, dramatically, this is different. The spirit, the writing, the acting, the tone, the music, the direction, it's all different. And it's like, because of how much so much else that's out nowadays that is sort of the next installment in a franchise is kind of grabbing onto the past and trying desperately to cling to past glory, rather than kind of forge its own path. I think that's one of the reasons why maybe this might not have been as appreciated. You know, because some of the audience approval has dropped on Rotten Tomatoes. The critics rated this really highly, but the audience approval is not great. On like Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic and things like that. But I think that's because it's not nostalgia. This is something different. You know, this is something that's forging its own path in a different direction completely from the show, from the film. And whether that works for you is something that only you can answer. For me, not having that nostalgia for the film, enjoying the film, but not having that nostalgia for it, I really enjoyed it. Like, this is a richly developed fantasy world that I would love to see more of. You know, I'd love to see an expansion of it. I'd love to see these characters again. And I'm really curious where season 2 and possibly season 3 would have gone. I think it could have been so good. So good. But alas, it doesn't seem to be. And that's a real shame. A real shame. Because this is a well-written show from a talented cast that looks amazing. You know, people are always saying, oh, they don't want this nostalgia. They want people to forge something new. That's literally what this is. This is something new from Willow. It's not the Willow that we had. It's almost Willow in name only, because it's a sequel to that. And it is forging its own path and doing something new with this established lore. That's all it's using that original film for. It's using it as lore. Not a template, not something that it has to get back to. That original film is the inspiration for this. And what this is really good. Like, I really enjoyed this. So yeah, I'd like to see more of it. You know, there's you know, I think the writing team was good. I think the directing team was good. I think the cast was good. And, you know, not to get too in depth in spoilers, there's a cliffhanger ending. Like, not really. It's like the ending of this is kind of done and solved, but there's a definite hook for season 2. And so I really want to see it. And I think a show like this deserves to be seen and deserves to be rewarded. And I think if you're a fan of fantasy, even like a passing fan of fantasy, this is something you can enjoy, whether you've seen the original film or not. Like, if you haven't, you'll get caught up on anything you need to know. So yeah, if you can get hold of Willow, I'd say give it a try, and I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. So that rant got a little bit away from me, but yeah, I think I've made my point. It's a good show, and honestly, the fact that you can't get it anywhere really annoys me, because yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. Like, the callbacks are enough to be charming without being overwhelming. The story, like I said, is a lot of fun, and there's some great character moments in here. Like, there's so much about the actual show itself that I haven't spoken about. Like, Borman is great, has some of the best lines in the show. Like, really, the actor playing him, Chadwa Patel, he's got some real, like, good action star potential. Like, I'm trying to think, is there like a character he could play in the MCU, for example, or the DCU, or a Star Wars film or something, some kind of big action hero protagonist in like one of these big franchises, because guy deserves better. He's really good. The kids as well. I say kids, the young actors, probably all in their 20s, but Ruby Cruz, Erin Kellyman, Tony Revolori, Ali Bamba, they are all really good in this. Really good. I'd be happy to see them all again as these characters or as someone else. Ali Bamba especially as Laura Dannon. She is she's fantastic. She's a really good, like, central character for all this to build around. And she's got proper, leading lady potential. I don't know if that's been used at all in anything yet. Like, this is like her big introduction, I think, and she deserves better than to just have this removed. Because she's good, and she gets some nice outfits in this as well. Like, she wears like this great knitted throw thing for knitted shawl for like a lot of it, and I've seen patterns for that online already. It looks amazing. And then like she gets this awesome leather jacket towards the end as well. But she's good, and it's, like I said, it's annoying that there's clearly more to this story. There's more to Alora's story, and the enemy behind everything. That still needs to be fought. But Borman's a lot of fun. Kit's a lot of fun. Kit and Jade especially are a lot of fun. And then Graydon and Alora. Graydon's got some twists and turns in his story as it gets towards the end. He's got some really good development. He has quite a good character arc here, but in fact they all do. Like, all of these characters, all the main characters have like a dedicated character arc that they go through throughout this series. That was one of the things that helps make it a really good series. But unfortunately there's no way to watch it without piracy. Like, I've downloaded it because there's no official way to watch it, and I wanted to watch this show. I wanted to finish watching it, so I downloaded the whole thing, and I'm so glad I have, because it's a good show. It's a very good show, and I'm annoyed that other people can't enjoy it legally. So, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to recommend. Just that, if you know your way around, torrent sites, or if you know any of these other video hosting websites, and especially if you have a good VPN and a good ad blocker, go for it. Find a way to watch this show, because it's well worth watching. And if Disney doesn't want to let people watch it, then seeing it illegally, seeing it pirated, is the only way to do it. And, once you see it, if you like it, talk about it. And I'm hoping this podcast sort of helps add to discussion. As small as my podcast is, it's someone talking about this show and getting this show discussed so that people talk about it, so that people, so that the show generates an audience. And yeah, if the only way to watch it is piracy, then yo-ho me hearties, let's go. Anyway, that's enough of that. I just want to say, all my friends, I hope you are all having, a good new year, because I'm hoping to get this episode out either New Year's Eve if I can, or the early hours of New Year's Day. So I hope you've all had a good one. I hope 2024 brings you everything you want. And I hope that you all take the very best care of yourself as you can, physically and mentally. If anyone needs anything, I know the holidays can be a trying time, especially if you have other things going on, if you have trauma around the holidays. I know some people do. It can be very hard. My offer, for someone to reach out to me if you need to, is always there. If you're listening to this podcast, I am so glad to have you. And, you've made my life better by listening to this. So if I can do anything to return that favor, I will. Okay? Until then, much love, my friends, and I will see you again next time. Bye for now. Thank you, my friends, for once again joining me on Garhdo Goes Geek. Your continued support for this podcast means the absolute world to me, and I am grateful for every single one of you who stays and listens to one of my episodes. It means the absolute world. Now, if you would like to engage more with me or the podcast, we have a Discord community, small but growing, and we now have commissions open on Ko-Fi. So if there's a topic you would like to see me cover, you can pay me to cover it. All funds will be used for legal purchase of the relevant items where I do not have them. Have a look on the link tree for more information. Until next time, look after yourselves.